Ambassador Yvette Stevens, on behalf of the staff and students of Imperial, a very warm welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. I would like to start by thanking Professor Ocheng and ISST for inviting me to give this lecture. In my lecture, I would like to cover the threats to national security in the 21st century while drawing particular attention to developing countries and low-income countries like mine. To start off, let us look at why it is important. Because all too often when we talk about national security, we look at the advanced countries. But why is it important to also look at national security in poor countries, in low-income countries? Because if we do not, when security breaks down, it has implications for us. It has implications for the international community, be it in trying to find solutions when there is a war, humanitarian assistance, trying to build back after the war. And one thing I would also like to note is that one of the implications is what we see happening so often now, migration. And the way we look at migration is that all these people are only looking for greener pastures. But I tell you that if they had what they needed in their own country, nobody would want to leave their country. I have an experience when I was ambassador. A Sierra Leonean who had crossed by Lampedusa and arrived in Switzerland, and the Swiss government wanted me to talk to him. So I said to him, why would you want to risk your life? You see all these deaths of people coming across the Mediterranean. And he said to me, Ambassador, you know, I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well risk it. And I said, but you're going to be sent back. And he said, well, I'll try again. So I'm just saying that the solutions that we are giving to some of these problems are not sufficient. We have to look into the root causes and address them. Now, I'll start by giving some basic definitions, which I think you all know. One is that of national security. National security is defined as the ability of governments to protect their citizens, economy, and institutions against threats. Traditionally, and I think Prof has mentioned it, it was seen as protection from external threats, such as attacks from perceived enemies operating from outside a country. Many countries, even the poorest, dedicated a significant, and still dedicate a significant amount of their budget on military spending, with the belief that only this can protect their countries from threats. Human security. In recent times, the international community has come to recognize that the traditional state security approach focused strictly on protecting the integrity and sovereignty of the state, its borders, institutions, and values, in the light of complex interdependent and transnational crises, such as terrorism, environmental concerns, coupled with an increase in civil wars and interstate and urban conflicts, is not enough to safeguard the security of its citizens. This has led to an understanding that modern security challenges must be addressed. The United Nations General Assembly resolution of 2001 defines the concept of human security as an approach to assist member states in identifying and addressing widespread and cross-cutting challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of their people. The resolution recognizes the right of people to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair. It calls for people-oriented, centered, comprehensive, context-specific, and prevention-oriented responses that strengthen the protection and empowerment of all people and all communities. And lastly, it recognizes the interlinkages between peace, development, and human rights. Even NATO has made a commitment to include human security principles in its operations and missions. Now I go to national resilience, and I think we heard about it. National resilience is a country's ability to prepare for, adapt to, withstand, and recover rapidly from various adverse conditions and disruptions. This includes natural disasters, economic shocks, infrastructure failures, and other crises. It encompasses the resilience of social, economic, environmental, housing, infrastructure, and institutional systems. In essence, national resilience is about ensuring that communities and systems are secure, adaptable, and capable of thriving despite challenges. National security in the 21st century has evolved significantly from traditional concepts. It now embraces a broad range of issues beyond just military defense. So why is this so? Let us start with the USA. I think the 9/11 attacks in 2001 led to the realization that threats to national security could be from within, and led to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. In developing countries, particularly in Africa, the main root causes of civil wars and unrest in the 20th century were not as a result of external factors, but from discontent from deplorable socioeconomic conditions. In addition, the 21st century developments in technologies have led to vulnerabilities to cyber attacks, domestic and international terrorism are on the rise, economic security and supply chain security are threatened, climate change is leading to natural disasters and competition for depleting natural resources, thus affecting national stability and security. The threat from pandemics such as COVID have meant that the considerations of this cannot be neglected in protecting lives and economies. Transnational threats such as human trafficking, drug trafficking, and organized crimes across borders are impacting national security across the world. These elements highlight the complexity and interconnectedness of modern national security challenges. In my lecture, I will focus on energy security, health security, environmental security, and cybersecurity as important components of human security and resilience. I will end by looking at threats from weapons of mass destruction and new security threats posed by emerging military technologies and the actions required to protect societies from their harmful use. It is clear that there is an indisputable link between development and national security. I would like to quote Bob Marley's song, in which he sings that a hungry mob is an angry mob. Indeed, if you look at the unrest and civil wars in Africa, for example, you will see that this has been the case. Evidence has shown that when a population is provided with all the basic necessities of life, when their human security is safeguarded, their willingness to disrupt their societies is reduced. Most of the civil unrest in African countries today are sparked by protests due to deprivations, when the military that should be protecting its people is used to act against them, and in some cases, even taking their lives. The 1998 United Nations Secretary General's report to the Security Council on the causes of conflict and the promotion of durable peace and sustainable development in Africa clearly identifies lack of socioeconomic development as one of the root causes of conflicts in the continent. There is evidence that even in cases where conflicts have emerged, not due to socioeconomic situations, and conflict has sparked for other reasons, that to secure the support of local population, rebel groups provide them with the goods and services that the governments could not provide, and therefore they get the support. This is the case in some parts of the Sahel now with ISIS, that some of the population are supporting ISIS merely because they are providing for the needs which the government has not been able to provide for. The Human Development Index was developed by UNDP, and it's as a measure of human development. Yeah, sorry. And it's what we can see now. It shows the three aspects that are used to develop, to define human development, the Human Development Index, which depends, if you look at it, on life expectancy, knowledge, and decent standard of living. And this leads to the Human Development Index. If you look at the Human Development Index for countries still looking at Africa, the countries that have the highest Human Development Index, such as Seychelles, Mauritius, Botswana, Morocco, Ghana, Namibia, and Cape Verde, are amongst the most peaceful countries in the continent. So how can technology be effectively applied to make populations resilient to threats from within? Echoing human security principles, the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda was unanimously approved by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015. The agenda calls for development strategies that result in more resilient societies where people are safe from chronic threats such as abject poverty, hunger, disease, violence, and repression. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals address, reflect an understanding that sustainable development everywhere must integrate economic growth, social well-being, and environmental protection. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals which came out of the United Nations Sustainable Development Report, 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Agenda. Now, the target to reach these universally accepted goals is 2030. But halfway through the implementation deadline, progress in achieving them has been far lower than expectations. In none of the goals are on target to be met by 2030, none of them. And goals such as no poverty has in fact deteriorated over the past 3 years. With a business as usual approach, the goals will remain unattainable by 2030 or even by 2050. Failure to achieve these goals is posing a big threat to human and national security. It is clear that bold steps need to be taken to effect the transformation required to reach these goals. And in this regard, the application of science and technology is vital. The 2019 Sustainable Development Report identified 4 levers to be employed to bring about the transformation needed to enhance progress. These are governance, economy and finance, science and technology, and individual and collective action. The 2023 report added to that capacity building as a 5th lever. The report also argues that transformation to sustainable pathways should be rooted in science. For this, the report argues for science that is multidisciplinary, equitable, and inclusively produced, openly shared, widely trusted, and socially robust and relevant to development. To be relevant to the SDGs, more scientific activity should be conceived and produced outside high-income countries in order to develop context-specific results. I would now go on to focus on energy security because, as you know, I think for me it's very important as an electrical engineer. The SDG 7, which is access to energy, could be seen in its own light, but also as an enabler for the achievement of most of the goals that we see in front of us. Reliable sources of energy are required for agriculture, for providing health, water services, but then let us look at energy availability. 675 million people are living without access to electricity, and hundreds of millions more only have access to very limited or unreliable electricity. Sub-Saharan Africa has the worst access to electricity. It is estimated that only 22% of Sub-Saharan Africa has access to electricity. It has 13% of the total world's population, but 48% of the share of global population without access to electricity. Access to modern energy electricity is crucial for development. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin once said, communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country. If we look at the next picture, which shows us the correlation between per capita energy use and the Human Development Index. You can see, and if you look particularly in Africa, the point I was making about lack of access to modern energy is reflected here. And if you look at the map itself, you will see that those countries that do not have access to electricity have the worst Human Development Index. So the correlation between access to electricity and development is clear. While there is growing awareness of the importance of energy for development, there has been less focus on the relationship between energy and stability. Yet, increasingly, energy is becoming a source of tension in some countries. Energy security is very important globally. It is part of the national security as well as national resilience. Energy security consists of availability, acceptability, affordability, accessibility, and sustainability of energy. If prosperity in the energy sector and security of energy supply is guaranteed for everyone, even the smallest community, the country will develop and the national resilience and security will be strong. Increasingly, countries are becoming aware of this, as the next figure shows in Indonesia, where they have drawn up this scheme to show the relationship of energy security to national security. Now, what are the dilemma of meeting energy needs in energy deficit countries? Now, in current times, the higher cost of fossil fuels as subsidies are removed and production is reduced is one of the setbacks for countries like mine and many countries in Africa that are now looking forward to actually transforming their raw materials to finished goods. And all of a sudden, they are restricted because you cannot do anything without energy. We can all admit that the Industrial Revolution, which took place, was as a result of fossil fuels. But these countries that are way behind are now being told they cannot use fossil fuels. And so they have a problem of what to use. They say renewable energy. Renewable energy is okay. There's abundant sunshine in the parts of the world that do not have access to electricity. The only problem with that is that the capital cost of exploitation of renewable energy is high. And in spite of all the talk and everything about getting countries in Africa to adopt renewable energy technologies, it is still interesting to note that only 2% of the energy used in Africa is from renewable sources. And indeed, the financing that we are promised during the various COP conferences are not forthcoming. Investment in the renewable energy sector is crucial for addressing human rights, humanitarian problems, development, and security. But more on that later. Now, what we have seen, is that even as of today, we have seen that energy security has has gained significance. The war in Ukraine has gotten countries in Europe to scramble for energy resources. We have seen in some parts of the world, countries are reverting to exploration and exploitation of their fossil fuel resources, in spite of the fact that we are all agreed that we have to remove fossil fuels from our generation of energy. We need to it's still a long way from that. But again, we see that Energy security has just become important, and countries are looking at being self-reliant, self-sufficient, or independent in energy supplies. This is where renewable energy is good for us. If we could exploit all the renewable energy we have from the sun, from the wind, we would have energy independence, which would avoid us being threatened by energy, by sources of energy being cut off. I would also like to touch on a number of technologies. This is not exhaustive, but I think the two technologies I would like to touch on is satellite remote sensing, and this is because the professor here is very much interested in that. Now, in terms of using satellite remote sensing, of course, it has a key role to play in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. In Africa, there's the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, which is an intergovernmental organization established in 1995. There is also established in 2004, Copernicus, which is headed by the European Commission in partnership with the European Space Agency. It's the Earth observation component of the European Union Space Program. It provides accurate, timely, and easily accessible information to improve the management of the environment, understand and mitigate the effects of climate change, and ensure civil security. The European Space Agency coordinates the delivery of data from more than 30 satellites. More recently, in 2021, Destination Earth, a flagship initiative of the European Commission, was launched to develop a highly accurate digital model of Earth, a digital twin of the Earth, to model, monitor, and simulate natural phenomena, hazards, and related human activities. Most recently, the Chinese Academy of Sciences developed SDG Sat-1, specifically to support the implementation of the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It was launched in November in 2021. It is the first Earth science satellite designed specifically to promote the implementations of the SDG. SDG Sat-1 is equipped with 3 types of payloads: thermal infrared, low light level, and multispectral imagers. These instruments allows it to monitor and evaluate indicators related to global sustainable development goals by providing detailed observations of human activities and their interaction with nature. The satellite orbits the Earth at an altitude of 505 kilometers and can achieve global coverage in 11 days. The Chinese Academy has also launched a second satellite to improve on the performance of the first one. These satellites provide data, but the translation of this data and their use is not widely available or not widely used in terms of implementing the SDGs in some of the poorest countries. There is a problem of accessibility, and there's the problem also of translation, where capacity building becomes extremely important in order to be able to empower countries like ones from my part of the world to be able to use the satellite images to advantage, to promote the implementation of the SDGs. But there's one problem also in space, and I will mention the problems of space debris. We need to safeguard space for use in development, for use in achieving the SDGs. But I think one major problem in space is that there are so many objects in space that there is accumulation of space debris, which poses significant risks to operational spacecraft and satellites. Efforts to mitigate space debris include designing spacecraft or satellites to minimize debris creation and developing technologies to remove existing debris from orbit. Managing space debris is a complex international challenge that requires cooperation from all spacefaring nations. As of January 2019, there were estimated to be over 128 million pieces of debris smaller than 1 centimeter, and approximately 900,000 pieces between 1 and 10 centimeters. The count of large debris, defined as 10 centimeter across or larger, was 34,000 in 2019 and at least 37,000 by June 2023. This is to say that if we are going to be able, if space is going to be available for our use, the questions of space debris need to be addressed. Drones, I will also refer to drones, which unmanned aerial vehicles. They are now being used in a variety of creative ways to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Delivering aid and other development materials can be costly, time-intensive, and dangerous, especially during times of conflict or crisis. Drones are being utilized by UN agencies and other organizations to deliver materials such as vaccines, contraception, and humanitarian aid. UAVs reduce the time it takes to deliver those items. For example, a journey from an urban center to a rural center that used to take 2 days now takes only 30 minutes. The increased pace and accessibility of delivery can mean more lives saved. Drones are used for delivery of medical supplies in Rwanda and Ghana, but these success stories are restricted to remote areas. Drones have a greater potential of assisting in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. I will now turn to new issues that threaten national security. And the first I would refer to would be pandemics. The COVID pandemic has shown us that pandemics pose important threats to lives and economies. Indeed, the statistics, the statistics of deaths by COVID show here, as we can see, that in some countries, the total world death, according to WHO, from COVID to date is 7.1 million. And 7.1 million, and as you can see, the most affected countries are listed here. I would like to say that if we compare the COVID statistics on death with, okay, oh wow, I missed that, okay, this one, okay, I think I missed that. With, if we compare it to the deaths that have been incurred by, in the world wars, we would see that. And I should have had something which I do not seem to have. Let's see. Oh, no. No. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm missing one slide, which was showing the comparing the number of deaths from COVID for some of the major countries that had deaths from COVID. And you can see that for many countries, for the USA, for instance, the deaths from COVID far exceeds the deaths from World War II. One reason why we should consider pandemics as indeed a threat to human lives. I'm sorry I missed that slide, but it actually shows for the countries that had the most deaths from COVID, that compared to the deaths they had from World War II, the deaths from COVID were much higher. And a reason for justifying why pandemics should be seen as threats to national security. Now, yeah, and I thought I missed that. Okay. According to Imperial College, and I must mention, coming home, MRC, Center for Global Infectious Diseases, more than 8 million deaths might have been avoided during the COVID-19 pandemic if safe and effective new vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 were developed and delivered within the first 3 months. Research from the center found that a successful 100 days mission in response to COVID-19's emergence would have had the greatest impact on the lives and livelihoods of people living in less wealthy countries. This would have averted 15.7 million COVID hospitalizations and saved 4.8 million lives in lower and middle income countries. The modeling study shows that countries with vaccination campaigns that began too late to prevent the large death toll associated with the Delta wave of COVID-19 in 2021 would have benefited significantly from the 100 days vision than countries where populations were largely protected through vaccination by the time the more virulent Delta variant became dominant. At this point, I would like to congratulate Imperial College London for receiving a Queen's Anniversary Prize for its response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The prize celebrates the rapid and collaborative early response from staff across different disciplines, including crucial modeling, developing treatments, vaccines, and tests, and their efforts supporting the international response to COVID-19. The World Economic Forum has highlighted the significant economic impact of COVID-19. The pandemic has cost the global economy an estimated $11 trillion so far, with potential future losses of $10 trillion in earnings. In comparison, the economic cost of World War II, which lasted 6 years and which is regarded as the most expensive war in history, is estimated at $40 trillion adjusted for inflation to today's dollars. If lives and economies are to be protected, preemptive research into vaccines and drugs for known diseases that have the potential to develop into pandemics need to be intensified, given that pandemics transcend borders. International solidarity is required to ensure that all countries have access to the products in a timely fashion, unlike what we saw with the COVID pandemic. The next threat I would like to address is climate change. Climate change poses an existential threat to humanity. A new World Economic Forum analysis warns that climate-intensified natural disasters may lead to 12.5 trillion in economic losses and over 2 billion healthy life years lost by 2050. Greenhouse gas emissions from the use of fossil fuels are major causes of climate change, and global goals have been set for replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy resources. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, even though a lot of effort has been made in recent times in adopting renewable technology, to meet the global goals installed, renewable energy capacity would have to grow from 3.9 terawatts today to 11.2 terawatts by 2030, requiring an additional 7.3 terawatts in less than 6 years. Yet current national plans are projected to leave a global collective gap of 3.8 tegawatts by 2030, falling short of the global goal by 34%. In addition, the annual energy intensity improvement rate must increase from 2% in 2022 to 4% on a yearly basis up to 2030. This will require faster progress in efficiency measures and electrification across multiple sectors, including transport, building, and industry. I was shocked to learn that for all the talk, the world still depends on 80% of its energy from fossil fuels. Since the risks from climate change cannot be reduced to zero, governments must take decisive action to help firms and people manage them. Doing so requires planning ahead and putting in place proactive measures that not only reduce climate risk, but also accelerate development and reduce poverty. The IPCC sixth assessment report considers climate resilience to be the capacity of social, economic, and ecosystems to cope with a hazardous event or trend or disturbance. It includes the abilities to reorganize and learn. It is obvious that science and technology has a key role in ensuring climate resilience. Investing in technologies to reduce disaster risks with a focus on prevention and preparedness, while also ensuring effective emergency response and rehabilitation, is crucial for addressing potential loss and damage associated with climate change impacts in coastal areas. The use of local and traditional knowledge can be scaled and replicated vis-à-vis organizational strengthening. Coastal zones are particularly vulnerable to the threats from climate change. They are home to about 40% of the world's population living within 100 kilometers of the coastline. A brief prepared by the Technology Executive Committee and the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage aims to inform policymakers and practitioners on technology solutions to assess and manage climate-related risks comprehensively in coastal areas. It identifies recovery and rehabilitation measures to address the impact from tropical cyclones, storm surges, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and other climate change-related impacts. Finally, in a time where urgent action is required, the brief illustrates good practices from different regions and possible ways for countries to overcome the challenge to scaling up their use. It covers technologies for coastal risk assessment, technologies for coastal risk retention, and technologies for recovery and rehabilitation of coastal zones. Recent technology developments to address resilience. There is the Global Flood, an AI platform designed to provide real-time flood forecasting and alerts. It uses advanced AI models to predict floods up to 7 days in advance, helping communities prepare and respond effectively. The system combines data from various sources, including weather forecast, river gauge measurements, and satellite imagery. Climate adaptation using AI, the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things describes devices with sensors, processing ability, software, and other technologies that connect and exchange data with other devices and systems over the internet or over communications network. It encompasses electronics, communication, and computer science engineering. The Internet of Things plays a significant role in enhancing climate change resilience. There are a few ways the Internet of Things contributes to this effort, which is, again, environmental monitoring, energy efficiency, precision agriculture, and disaster response, urban planning, and the smart use of water. By integrating the Internet of Things technologies, we can build more resilient systems that are better equipped to handle the impacts of climate change. It is clear that research and development to address climate change spread across various sectors. This is why Undaunted, a partnership between the Grantham Institute, Climate Change and Environment at Imperial College, and the Royal Institution, draws together Imperial's work across climate innovation. It acts as a hub for the UK's climate innovation community, creating new routes into green entrepreneurship and supporting the acceleration of startups and small and medium enterprises tackling climate change. I will now move on to cybersecurity. Information security has become increasingly important in the 21st century, where once ransomware was relatively rare, now this insidious and harmful malware is a global industry, often sponsored by state actors who use the proceeds to finance criminal activities and even warfare. A recent series of raids by Interpol highlights the significant activities of ransomware gangs. A joint investigation team involving Norway, the USA, UK, and Ukraine and others managed to bring to justice a ransomware gang that had targeted organizations in 71 countries, causing hundreds of millions of euros in losses. Ransomware as a business is now common worldwide and continues to grow as a lucrative source to steal money. Ransomware tactics morph and adjust to market forces, much like a business. One of the reasons for the success of ransomware is the ease at which cyber criminals enter the corporate network. The image of a hacker using supercoding skills to break through cyber defenses is unrealistic. Instead, ransomware attackers focus on the person in front of the computer. Attackers socially engineer employees, issue phishing campaigns, attack vulnerable systems and processes, and brute force passwords to install ransomware. These examples highlight the significant impact of ransomware attacks that can be on various sectors, from healthcare to technology. And I think recent attacks include high-profile attacks, include the Change Healthcare ransomware attack, the CDK Global ransomware attack, Ivanti VPN compromise, the Microsoft executive breach, and AT&T data breaches. The types of cyber attacks, of course, is malware, denial of service, phishing, spoofing, identity-based attacks, code injection attacks, supply chain attacks, social engineering attacks, insider attacks. But there are measures to protect from cyber attacks, and the reason why some of these high-profile attacks only lasted a few days and went away without serious consequences is because of the measures that are put in place to address these attacks. Such as these include regular backups, software updates, strong security tools, including antivirus, and anti-malware and firewalls, network segmentation, email and endpoint security, and the list goes on. I will now move on to the threats from weapons of mass destruction. There exists today a number of regulatory frameworks governing the use of biological, chemical, radiological, nuclear, or any other weapon that can kill or significantly harm many people or cause great damage to artificial structures. Ideally, these treaties would remove the threats. Oops. Why isn't it moving? Let's see. Oh. Help. No, okay. Yeah, this is the one I wanted. We can see that these treaties, which have been passed by the United Nations, relate to biological weapons, which were passed already in 1975, chemical weapons, 1997, and the nuclear ban treaty, oops, which was recently passed in 2021. Ideally, these treaties are supposed to put regulatory systems in place to avoid the harmful use of these weapons. But interestingly enough, is that you look at how many countries, not all countries have signed or ratified these conventions. And the most recent one is that of the Nuclear Ban Treaty, which we were part of a bit, and Ambassador here, we were all a part of negotiating the Nuclear Ban Treaty. And it's now entered into force, but it only has 73 state parties. None of the countries that have known nuclear arsenals have signed it, have ratified that treaty. The point I'm trying to make is that again, the UN can do what it is in terms of monitoring the implementation of these treaties, but this doesn't prevent these treaties being used, these weapons being used by non-signatories or non-ratifiers. However, there is no universal adoption of these treaties, as you can see. Interestingly enough, the countries that possess these weapons are the ones that have not ratified or acceded to these instruments. It is also important to note that hostile non-state actors including terrorist organizations, continue to seek to acquire weapons of mass destruction and to use them against populations, territories, and forces. Terrorists believe that weapons of mass destruction attack has the potential inter alia to so panic and strain national emergency response capabilities. Non-state actors have already used chemical weapons in Syria and Iraq, and they are known to both seek access to more sophisticated weapons of mass destruction, as well as to attempt to weaponize toxic industrial chemicals and other materials that may be easier to acquire. By definition, weapons of mass destruction are intended to inflict widespread and indiscriminate harm to populations at risk. Unfortunately, only the most advanced countries can afford the measures required to ensure resilience to attacks. For the biological weapons, although Biological Weapons Convention is the oldest of the 3 conventions, there is no regulatory body set up for monitoring compliance. This makes it difficult to determine the resilience actions that need to be put in place. However, the experience from COVID-19 has demonstrated the devastating effects that biological weapons can have on populations, and there is a growing awareness of the need to put measures in place to protect populations from the possible threats of biological weapons. Chemical weapons, there is a body that is monitoring implementation of the treaty, and this has also recently in May set up an organization, a center which hosts laboratory, which equipments, stores, and training facilities. It will foster the peaceful use of chemistry, facilitate national implementation of the convention, and enhance state parties' capabilities to respond to threats through assistance and cooperation activities. Now, if we turn to nuclear weapons, there are a number of treaties on nuclear weapons. And as I mentioned, the last one was the treaty on the prohibition but before that, you can see that there have been treaties, there have been regional attempts to ban nuclear weapons. If you look at the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone, the Comprehensive Nuclear Ban Treaty, there is also Central Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone, African Nuclear Free Weapon Free Zone, known as the Pelindaba Treaty. And however, this is the situation in relation to nuclear weapons. Now, it is interesting to note that while developed countries can afford, again, the system to put systems in place, expensive measures to safeguard their populations from attacks from weapons of mass destruction, most developing countries cannot afford these measures and remain vulnerable. Now, recently, the General Assembly, in only, I think about 5 days ago, actually, because of the threat of nuclear war, because as we see a number of the countries now that are at war have nuclear weapons capabilities. And the General Assembly, they are getting a bit scared. What if these capabilities are employed? And the General Assembly only 5 days ago passed a resolution bringing together some scientists, renowned scientists, 21 scientists, to actually look at what the impact of a nuclear war would be, not only on the populations directly affected, but how this would affect countries, regions, the world, and not only for immediately, but also in years and maybe decades to come. So this is a new resolution which came out from the General Assembly only 5 days ago. And many of the countries with nuclear weapons, surprise, surprise, did not vote in favor of that resolution. I would now move on to autonomous and intelligent systems for defense applications. New technologies, including nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and additive manufacturing, also threaten to enable the development of even more effective and more lethal chemical, biological, and nuclear materials, such as those that can overcome protective measures and resist detection, decontamination, or medical countermeasures. They may also increase the availability of low-cost dispersal systems, as well as dual-use devices for biomanufacturing, which could further enable the use of biological or chemical weapons. Innovation may also facilitate threats from the convergence of technologies such as unmanned systems and other novel delivery systems coupled with chemical, biological, and nuclear materials. These must be addressed, including by strengthening relevant international agreements, national implementation of those agreements, and global norms. At the same time, it should also be noted that innovation offers promising new and enhanced capabilities that can support defense from weapons of mass destruction, including enhanced approaches to detection, identification, protection, decontamination, medical management, consequent assessment and management, and knowledge management. And there are many systems that are being developed that are using advanced technology, and these need to be looked at. Now, the most concern now that I think you probably would have heard about is the use of autonomous weapons, with systems which require autonomy to perform their functions in the absence of direction or input from a human actor. It was in 2013 when I was representing Sierra Leone as a member of the Human Rights Council, and my colleague there sitting here was also representing Maldives, that the Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Killing brought the matter to the attention of the Human Rights Council. He thought that using autonomous weapons to take human lives was against all human rights principles. How could a machine, however well developed, take a decision to take a human life? And there was very strong statements at the Human Rights Council. And the first reaction was that, oh, these machines do not exist. But we know for sure that with the development of these technologies, we are getting to that point. And I think there are some evidence that some of it has already been used, but I would not say anything on that. So basically, what happened is that the matter was referred to the committee, the disarmament committee, the Committee on Certain Conventional Weapons, for discussion by experts to see how we could have some regulation on these technologies. Now, it was interesting that this discussion has been going on since 2014. For the first 3 years, there was an informal technical group working on it, an informal group of governmental experts, and they were to look at what are the possibilities of regulating these weapons. Now, it has been very difficult because at the start, many of the countries didn't even show up for the countries that have the capacity and developing it. They didn't even show up for the discussions at the informal governmental group of experts. But eventually, they were dragged onto it because, I mean, I had such things because I came from the human rights perspective. I never been to disarmament, and I went to the council, and the language there was, when they said, we need to neutralize, I thought, oh, neutralize, yeah. And then I realized that neutralize means kill. And for me, it was strange. But we eventually got into it because some of the arguments given, you could not believe it. That yes, it's good to use these weapons because that will save the lives of soldiers. Yes, But what about the people that these weapons are going to kill? I mean, what about international humanitarian law? Who is going to be held accountable when these systems malfunction? So the discussions have been going on. I happened to be, because I was very vocal, I was made a friend of the chair for the first 3 years, and just trying to make sure that, the points came out every time I would insist. Machines cannot take human lives. Anyway, but eventually this is still going on, but there's one thing that has emerged. You can imagine this has been discussed for so long. And then, in fact, what we got a letter for this group that was discussing it, we got a letter from over 100 technical companies, which was addressed to the CCW. And I read this because it's very important. It says, lethal autonomous weapons threaten to become the third revolution in warfare. Once developed, they will permit armed conflict to be fought at a scale greater than ever before, and at timescales faster than humans can comprehend. These can be weapons of terror, weapons that despots and terrorists use against innocent populations, and weapons hacked to behave in undesirable ways. We do not have long to act. Once this Pandora's box is opened, it will be hard to close. We therefore implore the high contracting parties to find a way to protect us all from these dangers. Since 2018, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has maintained that lethal autonomous weapons are politically unacceptable, morally repugnant, and has called for their prohibition under international law. In his 2023 new Agenda for Peace, the Secretary General reiterated this call, recommending that states conclude by 2026 a legal binding instrument to prohibit lethal autonomous weapon systems that function without human control or oversight, and which cannot be used in compliance with international humanitarian law and to regulate all other types of autonomous weapon systems. He noted that in the absence of specific multilateral regulations, the design, development, and use of these systems raise humanitarian, legal, security, and ethical concerns and pose a direct threat to human rights and fundamental freedoms. After so many years of discussion, there's at least one agreement on one point, and that is that humans should be in the loop. And at all stages of the life cycle of autonomous weapon systems, starting from research and development and testing, everything. Humans have to be in the loop. And so I was happy to participate in an IEEE group that was set up to look at what do we mean by having the human in the loop. And this group, after a year of deliberations, has come out with this publication, a framework for human rights, for human decision-making through the life cycle of autonomous and intelligent systems in defense applications. And this just recently came out about a week ago as a result of the work of this group, and it is really worth looking at to see how at every point in the life cycle of the development and use of these weapons, the human is there in the loop. As is the case for weapons of mass destruction, the key to providing resilience lies in regulation of their use. In the absence of this, population, particularly those who cannot afford to put in place expensive defense systems, such as the Iron Dome that Israel has, would be exposed to their attacks. So on that note, I will make a few concluding remarks. I have tried to, in this lecture, first of all, to look at national resilience and security for parts of the world that are for the poor and developing countries. And also, in that, I have looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, which I argue that the implementation of those goals provides the resilience required to withstand any threats from outside. And then I have looked at there is a resolution, a twin resolution in 2016 by the Security Council and the General Assembly. Those of you who know how the UN works, the Security Council doesn't have much. This is first of its kind. They go their own ways. But there was a twin resolution which basically mirrored each other. And this resolution on sustaining peace emphasized the importance of a comprehensive approach to sustaining peace, particularly through the prevention of conflict and addressing its root causes, strengthening the rule of law at the international and national levels, and promoting sustained and sustainable economic growth, poverty eradication, social development, and sustainable development. I have examined the technologies that exist and could be more comprehensively applied to build national resilience if the necessary financial, I should mention, I thought because I'm talking about science, but of course, all of this is underpinned by availability of the financial resources to address these challenges. And in addressing new threats to security, such as pandemics and climate change, I have made the case to support the reason why these should be considered as threats to national security and indicated how technology can be applied to make populations resilient to their harmful effects. Finally, I have addressed the question of regulation as a means of making vulnerable populations resilient to attacks by weapons of mass destruction and autonomous and intelligent systems in defense applications. But even when the regulations exist, mechanisms are required to monitor compliance given recent developments. It is thus worrying that in the case of Biological Weapons Convention, there's no such mechanism exists. I cannot end this lecture without reference to the role that Imperial College London is playing in addressing national resilience and security. I've mentioned a few. Many of the issues relating to this subject are multi-sectoral, and Imperial should be commended for its multi-sectoral hubs. And I think Prof referred to a number of them. I will not repeat this, a number of them which exist. The importance of these hubs cannot be over-exaggerated, because basically it is only by coming together and pulling together the different disciplines that we can comprehensively address these threats which we face. These hubs foster interdisciplinary collaboration, bringing together experts from different fields to innovate and solve complex problems. In view of the interrelationships, even among the work of the various hubs, it is important that these hubs collaborate with each other. The involvement of social scientists also in the work of these hubs is also vital. Imperial also has regional hubs in Europe and Asia and the Pacific region, and I think one was recently opened in the States. Where was it?
States, but also Ghana.
Okay. I wanted to end by saying that there needs to be a hub in Africa. Serious consideration should be given to a hub in Africa, and I think the Prof is going to work towards that. Such a hub for Africa could benefit tremendously from the scientists and would help to solve some of the problems that are faced in Africa, which are unique to the situations that we face in Africa. On that note, I will end my lecture. Thank you.